Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wired for Logic. I have my guest today is George Sullivan, and he is the Senior Principal and CEO at Net Zero Analysis and Design Corporation. Thanks for being with us today, George.
Hey, good day. How are you?
Good. I'm excited. It's a good week so far, and excited to hear what you have to share with us today about what your company does and how you guys use technology and leverage it, and what your process and procedures are, and all that kind of stuff. Very curious to learn more about it.
Not a problem. So, Net Zero Analysis and Design Corp is my fifth star successful exits. So, this one was founded in 2015, and I've been involved with carbon since 1994, as in carbon measurement. So, I've got quite a history in this whole background. I've seen everything come up and watched it all fall apart and how it all worked. So, and have sat on a whole bunch of UN commissions. And so, just a little background on what this is all framing. So, when we talk about renewables, we have more than just solar and electric. We look at hydrogen, we look at nuclear, we look at hydro, we look at biofuels. There's a lot of things that go into that renewable, if you will,
Bucket.
basket
Yep.
that companies can choose to use, but we're finding that a lot of them don't know how to properly apply it. So, and a lot of it's due to the fact that the marketplace has been full of junk third party rating systems that have been giving out bad guidance. So, and I'm talking about like USGBC, SBIT, right? Things of that nature, to where none of them are standards and none of them are even corporate GHG protocol. People are latching onto it and saying, oh, this, and this, and it's just not, doesn't jive with ISO, which 15 was selected by the UN as the measurement system globally for carbon. So we're ISO 14001 environmental lead auditors. So, and we're a verification validation body. So, as far as the company goes, so we're what's called a VVB in the marketplace. So, we do attestation for SEC reporting, for EPA reporting, just here in the US for state reporting. So, for any sort of investor reporting, also, we do attestation on that. The other side of our business is the consulting side. So, if we consult, we cannot do the attestation. If we do the attestation, we cannot consult. You
That
either
makes
fall
sense.
into one bucket or the other. And that is a big misnomer, even in the marketplace today, because you get people that are working with their consulting side, but their attestation side is separate. No, go look up the federal laws wrapped around what they can do and how you can get in trouble as the client, right? I don't care if they got a wall, if they're in two separate offices or buildings or whatever, it's still the same company. It's still senior management that's overseeing that. So they're very, very specific on what they can do. And then also two non-disclosures have to be listed. So if I've consulted with you before, I've got to be able to say how much money was spent, how much consulting was done, what was on, and how long ago that was. And it's up to 5 years ago for most of the state requirements. So the Fed requirement runs out to about 10. So just as a heads up. So you've got to have very solid tracking on all of that when you look at an attestation officer or even a consultant, because you have to be listed in what's called the mandatory reporting requirements. So just as a heads up, and we can talk about both of those,
Yeah.
but I will. So that's our business in a nutshell. And we work across all verticals. So we've got financial, we've got industrial, we've got oil and gas, chemical, pharma, food, real estate. So there's not anything that doesn't have to report. And let's just frame that a little bit further. The IRA, right, which was the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, expanded the EPA reporting requirements to include all companies. So just as a heads up, depending on what size you are, that's where they're going to come knocking on your door first. They'll probably start with publics or large privates, EPA, and they're already doing RFIs, requests for information, on people making claims of carbon neutrality or reporting emissions under GRESB or making claims under SBTI or whatever. They're already out there saying, hey, why don't you explain that to us, right?
How did you
So if
reach
the
all these
regulators,
numbers? Yeah.
so if the regulators asking those questions, guess what they're looking at is that they're going to be really watching your report,
hmm What are
right?
Yeah, what are some examples of some clients that you guys have? Like maybe some names that we would recognize, or I don't know if that's private information or
Most of them do not. We don't give out client names, and here's why: is because in kind of our attestation reports appear in their public documentation, so that's where that's at. But we don't really get into handing them out. We used to actually publish clients on our website, and what we found out is that the clients were getting quite a bit of heat about not using these third-party rating systems.
okay.
Right, and they just said, "We don't do that, and here's what's up." So we stopped. They've requested that, more than glad to sign a 10-year contract with you because that's what our average contract is, 10 years, right? Unless it's changed by state or Fed or by country if you're in the EU. But there is an NDA and everything is conducted under NDA. I can talk about general numbers and things of that nature, but we've got the largest food distributor on the planet as one of our clients. And they've been doing quite a bit on reducing that carbon footprint, their reportables. But when we got involved with them and doing the consulting on it, we found out that they were not tracking their refrigerant gases at all, which tripled their carbon footprint just through refrigerant releases. Because a lot of these refrigerant gases that they use for their trucks and whatnot, semi-tractor trailers, they're pushing 1,000 times CO2e or 1,000 times the global warming potential. So it really was eye-opening to be able to go ahead and get a handle on that. And once again, they were doing corporate GHG, so they weren't even structured appropriately to be able to make it all happen, as in looking at how that really worked. So that would be an example of a consulting example. And think about it, when you've got 147 sites across the US and Canada, that's a lot of refrigeration sites.
Yeah. So when you see a shortcoming like that, like, hey, you guys aren't reporting X, Y, or Z, when you say you guys are consulting with them, are you directing them to where they need to go vendor wise as well? Like, hey, we need to collect this data from you guys in order to put into this report. In order to collect that data, you need to get with this vendor to do these readings. Is that how that works, or what does that look like?
And let's get into the specifics. So first of all, it was setting up and then educating each one of the facility guys
Mm-hmm.
that are responsible for doing maintenance on the facilities. So we set up a refrigerant tracking plan, right? So corporate setting up for a refrigerant tracking plan. It's on the B drive, just picking a drive that everybody has access to. We set up a giant spreadsheet for each one of the facilities. You open it at your facility, your page comes up, right? Automatically. And then here you go. You're noting the date, the time, how many pounds of refrigerant were added, what type of refrigerant was added, and who the vendor was. So we can match that, can be matched against a delivery ticket or a
Yep,
service ticket.
that makes sense.
So those go in automatically, and then those are double checked by the environmental health and safety department. So because most of these refrigerants, you cannot be releasing them indoors. If they happen to have an accident where a forklift hits a refrigerant line, you have to vacate the building, and the building's got to be entirely aired out because it's caustic to people in any sort of high density exposure. So
Yeah.
we can cross check it as doing the consulting. We can cross check it as, okay, here's the temperature readings off of your your freezer units, right? Because it's freezer, refrigerator, then non-refrigerated is usually the way the warehouses are set up, right? So just as a heads up. And we can actually check those temperature gradients for that time frame to see if you were running through and vacating the air and what you were doing about it, because we'll see a temperature rise. So that's how far we get into checking your data,
So
right? When we're,
do they have electronic readers or something in these cooling devices that record all this data somewhere?
yeah. So think about your home Nest, if you will. They've
Mhm.
got a commercial version of that, and they're actually keeping, because of the doors opening and closing and all the rest of that, they have air curtains and other things going on. That keeps frozen, right? Then it moves into refrigerated. So that's the next step, right? And then the warmest side, which is open to the tractor trailers as they're being full, that's what they call dry goods. So
Okay.
that's the way the warehouse is set up. And you're going back and forth with all these forklifts running in and out. So they actually monitor those temperatures, turn on and off fans. You can see electrical usage. You can see temperature drops and rises. You can see all of those items across all of that. That's part of the BMS system, building management system, that actually operates their building.
So they track all that live then.
That's all tracked. It's automated to
Wow.
where they don't have, and all that data is stored on an hour by hour basis. So, and then they actually save it, because if they have an issue to where somebody says, "Hey, I got sick from X, Y, and Z," right? And you're dealing with a health code violation, they're looking across that entire chain back to the manufacturer. So the data becomes very specific about that. They don't throw it away. So it gives us access to all of that. And it works out really well.
You guys aggregate all that information into your spreadsheets, or you include that as an addendum or something to your report?
It's an addendum, a data addendum, that this occurred at this time. Here's the backup data for this occurrence. Here's what was done. Here's how many pounds were released, right? And here's how much you have to, the system was refilled and repaired. And so that sets up our then calculations for just their management system for refrigerants,
Okay. Interesting.
right? So that's how that in detail piece works. And the same goes with, let's just take natural gas, for example, right? Because we all have natural gas. Well, natural gas is methane, and fossil natural gas is 50.5 in most states. That's what the regulators call it, as natural gas. So it's got to be a predominant. California is the outlier there because they actually regulate that. It's got to be 91% methane. But then the other gases are a total mix. It could be propane, it could be a whole bunch of other stuff that's mixed into there, as long as it has the same high heat value. So when you look at doing the calculations for a natural gas, we call it scope 1 reporting, right? You've got to get the natural gas analysis from the utility for each one of those quote unquote deliveries, and that's monthly. So you get the natural gas analysis from the utility, and then you run the numbers on all of those, because each one of those has a different profile for doing your emissions calculations. And then you go ahead and average it out by percentages of what each one is made up of to get a total for a high heat value and a percentage. Then on the flip side of that, the flip side of your equipment, it says that it's 80% efficient or 60% efficient.
Hmm.
Most of it is 60% because it's just older equipment that's out there. That's great. That's what the tag said when the equipment came out of the manufacturer. That has nothing to do with reality at this point in time, because it doesn't, maintenance being done or not being done is the question. So you then do what's called a flue gas analysis. You take a flue gas sample that tells you what's in that flue gas, which then directly relates to your initial analysis from the utility. And depending on how that looks, it tells you what your burner efficiency actually is. So
Okay.
because it's going up your stack, that's your 60% efficient burner could be running at 30% efficient because it's 10 years old and nobody's bothered to maintain it, or it's worn out.
Yeah. So
So
are there limits that they have to stay within, and then once it goes below a certain threshold, they have to replace it, or what does that look like?
that's strictly up to the operator, right? It's your money. You can waste it any way you want, but you have to report your emissions. So,
Right.
so what happens is that you're seeing more methane coming out of the stack, and that stack methane is 25 times CO2. So you have a much higher emissions that you then have to report.
Because it's
So
not
if you
burning
don't want the higher,
efficiently.
right, exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. So it makes a big difference on that. So once again, the BMS is one of those tools that we're collecting data from because the BMS is running that system. So those are things that you really start looking into when you start doing the consulting side of this, right? As far as helping a client set all these programs up within them internally. So we do a lot of work with environmental health and safety departments, and this is just part of their annual monthly checks or weekly checks on equipment, to where they're going through and checking and metering and what do we do, how come, when, where, and why. They already have the protocols set. If you have a company with an EASE program, that's usually what we consider a highly viable client that their emissions are going to be correct if they're calculated correctly, right? If they're using the right emission factors and things of that nature, or the right calculation for it. So those are much more attestation clients than they would be consulting clients, right? So we can do a little bit of consulting on attestation, but it's much more, you have what's called a correctable error, okay, on this sheet. And
Mhm.
that's as far as we can get. We cannot point it out any further than that, but we can point out that you have a correctable error, or you might have a non-correctable error because your data is off, right? And you need to go back through the data. And we found that on the attestation side to where 1 month looks almost exactly the same as another. And it's just got a different set of initials signing off on it. We're like, wait a minute, you said this unit wasn't turned off. Why is the meter reading still exactly the same or just a little bit more, right? So, that would be a non-correctable error unless they were able to pull it up. We also refer to their mandatory reporting requirements, which says, hey, if we have missing data, our missing data policy is the following. We'll actually take a look at that missing data policy, see how they average data when they are missing data for a particular facility, and take a look at that and make sure that that is calculated correctly to whatever regulation we're looking at. So it's those types of things to where we come into play. So it's a huge back and forth
Right.
on doing attestation. But it's like consulting clients. You could be meeting with them almost weekly for several hours to go through where they're at, because we'll cut it up into various pieces, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but then get them up and running and then just follow through and then say, how are you training the people that you're going to replace the existing folks with? Because they're going to retire, they're going to find other jobs, they're going to get promoted. You know what I'm saying? There's reasons why those bodies are going to change in those seats. So how are you training the next round, right? Which is a key piece. And that's one of those, it's easier to train them internally than it is to send them off for training.
Right. 'Cause you can train them on all
You
the
know,
different nuance of the business and how the business operates on a daily basis.
or how that facility operates, right?
Right.
And a lot of times the facility is unique enough to where you've got to have, oh, we replaced that meter, that sub meter, 90 days ago. We don't have to replace it at 6 months like we do with everybody else because the old one went bad. So it's still good until the second change out of this year because meters go bad. Those have to be calibrated. What is your calibration schedule? Things of that nature. So that's why I said there's a lot that gets into how that all works. And so having a facility that is training up the next round is the key piece, right?
Y-
And do you change them out when they do maintenance downs?
Yeah. You mentioned that you guys have contracts with these people for like 10 years. That's a pretty long time. And in our industry, a lot of times 3 years is a long time. So I've had a handful of clients where they've had contracts with MSPs for like, 5 years, but I've never heard of anything beyond that. So is that like a standard across the industry? And what does that look like working with the same client for, 10 plus years?
Over the 10 plus years, we've had clients double and triple in size. We've also had clients get bought, sold, traded, ownership change. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When you go through all of that, and we've had clients downsize, right? As they've gotten smaller because they divested of things. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? Or they've done major infrastructure improvements that have improved their efficiencies. A lot of clients, depending on what industry you're talking about, okay. One of our clients just bought another sizable company, right? They viewed it as a merger, but the merger wasn't, they were the larger of the two. Let's put it that way. They were
Right.
they were writing a check to the smaller
Yeah.
guy, right? So we viewed it as a purchase. So then it's integrating that reporting and looking at them. So we were actually key in taking a
Gosh.
look at that addition on how they were doing it versus knowing what they were already doing internally. So in that migration from this outside organization that had, you know, 43 facilities coming into the one that already had 260 facilities, that is a huge number, but still it was bringing all of that up to speed and saying, hey, we're catching a couple of things. We need to do the following. We wanted to point this out. This is going to be on your radar. Here's what's up. And so the reporting side of that still goes underneath the old client to where they're going to have to hold on to that for the next 12 or 18 months, reporting until they make that switch, right? Until it's switched over.
What happens when you have a merger like that and say you guys were consulting for company A and company A purchases company B? Company B already has a consultant, has a contract in place, but now they're part of
Most of the
company A.
time, most of the time, company B has an annual contract if they have a contract at all.
Okay. So the smaller ones don't normally do large 10-year contracts then.
No, and most of the time they're doing self-reporting. So without the big change, right back to 2022, 2020, the IRA was attestation was required for 2026, 2025 data, 2026 going forward. So that was the big change in the entire marketplace,
Okay. Interesting.
right? So that was included because EPA was looking at the number of new companies that were going to have to report, new industries. Real estate's got to report in 2026.
What are they going to have to report?
They have huge amounts of emissions. Real estate makes up 51% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. They make oil and gas look like nothing.
So like real estate is in just commercial properties and buildings and whatnot?
Commercial, industrial,
Okay.
right? Multifamily, residential,
Okay.
right?
Interesting.
Warehouses, all of that, industrial properties, all of that
Okay.
stuff. So, you look at some of the bigger REITs, just take the public REITs and just take a look at all of them. All of those are going to have to report.
It's a lot. How do you guys, I mean, that seems like a big opportunity for something like you guys to capitalize on. How do you guys find your clients? Do they come through referrals? Do you guys market? Like, what does that look like?
For us, we actually get a lot of clients from referrals. We get a lot of clients from doing, when you say marketing, I do a whole bunch of articles. I sent you a couple articles that we've got. I've got a series of 6 coming out articles, 2 of which have already been issued. I've got 4 more to do. So much more talking about looking at the marketplace and seeing who new clients are asking about. We're getting requests for proposal or requests for information, RFP or RFI requests, right? So tell us who your ISO certificate is issued by. Are you in good standing? Can you prove the following? How many auditors do you have? What states do you work in? There's just a whole bunch of stuff. And then we get RFPs, request for proposal. Well, the request for proposal, if it's not attached to, hey, this is the way we've been doing reporting already, right? Then it makes it very difficult to give somebody a number. So we'll usually say, hey, if you want an RFP, I need to see what you're doing currently, because that will educate me on how much work I'm going to have to quote.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like saying, "Hey, I need you to come to my house and remodel my 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house." It's like, okay, what does
Yeah,
it look like now? Like, I need to see what it looks like currently to tell you what it's going to cost. That makes sense. Yeah,
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. I thought it was actually pretty interesting. Somebody had reached out because they had found me on LinkedIn, and they had also got us as a referral for doing some consulting. And once again, this was a large REIT, and they pushed it down from senior management down to a new hire, right? That had no background in climate or anything else, and they were only asking how much does it cost.
Yeah, that's
And I
like
was like,
a small portion of the puzzle there, buddy.
yeah, I couldn't tell you how much it costs. How many facilities do you have? "Oh, you didn't look up our company? No, you sent me an email from Gmail. Otherwise, I would have looked you up from, sorry, I wasn't thinking about sending you from my corporate." Yeah,
Related. Why would you?
yeah, but so just as a point, we get all kinds.
Yeah,
Yeah. That never went anywhere, by the way.
yeah, that doesn't
So
surprise
just as a
me.
heads up.
We get all kinds too. Sometimes we will talk to a client on the IT side of things and say, "Hey, can you send me a picture of the computer?" And they send a picture of the monitor. And it's like, that's not the computer, that's the monitor. I need the actual computer itself. Oh, that's not the computer? No, that's
Yeah. So you're seeing how that sort of works, right?
yeah, for sure. For sure. There's definitely a degree of incompetency in different fields, I can tell.
Right. And I don't think that they're ever going to, let's put it this way. When we've had clients that have done that, or RFIs that have done that, request for information, and then all of a sudden it turns around and they're getting fined, because the EPA has stated that if you screw up the 2026 reporting, we're looking at a minimum fine of $5 million, right? Which would put a dent in anybody's P&L.
And
Okay.
this is for any size company, not just like top tier company. This is any company.
They didn't identify company size. They just said they were looking at starting at 5 million.
Wow. That's a lot.
Right. Well, to a 2 or 3 or $5 billion company, $5 million is to the right of the decimal point, right?
Yeah.
To a $50 million company, $5 million is a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
So what they're looking at is, where's your point of pain? And the point of pain is having to explain to your investors that we had to pay these fines, right? That's where that's at.
Because we gave the reporting responsibility, or the looking around for a reporting company, we gave that responsibility to an intern, and they sent it from a Gmail and then never followed up, and now we're getting fined for not reporting properly.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then so we'll get them knocking on the door saying, hey, now that we're getting RFIs, because a lot of our clients are getting RFIs because management had them reporting to GRESB and reporting to a whole bunch of, corporate GHG and all the rest of this stuff, as opposed to just reporting to EPA, or they were giving different numbers out because each one of those requires different sets of calculations, which are not compliant to EPA. So you're ending up with different emissions numbers. Why don't you guys explain why all of this is different than this? That's been the latest big wrinkle that we're seeing. And in our attestation letters, we'll tell you up front, you have to use these numbers in all reporting, third party or not. I don't care what they say. These are the numbers you're handing to the Fed.
Yeah.
Right? It's like taxes.
Yep.
But that's where that's at. So that's a big education that we're seeing that's occurring in the marketplace right now as we go forward. And a lot of that ties to renewables, which is pretty intriguing.
Yeah. How long does it usually take you when you get a request for proposal and then you tell them, hey, I need your previous reporting or whatever? How long does it take you to kind of parse through that information and then make a determination on, okay, we're going to charge you, whatever. I don't know how much you charge, but how do you get to that answer?
So if we get an RFI or versus an RFP, we'll say, if you would like more detailed information, send us the following, just on either one. And if you want a better price, or if you want to get a honed down price as opposed to a range, because if you give us an RFP with no backup, we'll say, hey, this is the range we're looking at, but if you give us this, and this information, we'll be able to get that down to a much tighter number. We usually get those pretty quickly, and it takes us 2 to 3 days to go through it, turn it around, right? Because some of it is within 3 hours. We're going to take a look at it, right? And say, yeah, you don't have a program. This is all make believe. You're using all, we just landed a new client, and the new client is using 100% averages that they pulled off the web for everything. This is our average energy use in natural gas. This is our average. Okay, you got data to back that? Well, did you go to your no, we didn't do utility bills. We just did averages that we pulled off the web.
So they just looked up averages online and then plugged those numbers into their report?
Yeah, right.
That's interesting.
And I was like, okay. So yeah, yours is going to be more towards this price because we're going to have to start from ground zero and work up from here, right?
Yeah, that's sounds like
we're
a lot
going to
of
give
work.
you those are a lot of work. Those are not the cheapest of cheap, but those are a lot of work. Then you get the other ones that, hey, our current attestation vendor got bought by a company, and so they're no longer doing attestation, that's been the market run here lately, because there are very few VVBs, verification validation bodies, in the market in the United States. And companies have realized that, hey, we can buy one of these guys and use their guys to send out to our global population to train everybody so that we're compliant with all the regulations and then have them overseeing those zones, right? Be it India, be it Japan, be it whatever, and France or Germany, and handle all the reporting responsibilities for us, but build a department underneath them. So we're seeing companies like ours get bought for relatively insane amounts of money because you can't go out and find these people. There are no schools producing them. There are no schools educating them. It's just, here it is.
So this is immediately where my brain went. George, what happens when you retire in 5 or 10 years? You say there's no schools producing the people that do what you guys do, and yet at the same time, the EPA's increased the reporting requirements. Who's going to satisfy these reporting requirements for these companies?
Well, we do internal training here. So just as a heads up.
So you're
we look
training the
at
next
10 years
wave.
of, we're training the next wave. So you look at 10 years of experience. Chemi is usually Emmy, EE is usually our qualifiers. Okay. That have had exposure to ES reporting. So in other words, you worked for a utility doing ES reporting. You've worked for, remember, those people are out there. Natural gas and oil, those people are out there. Pharma, those people are out there. Those departments are developing their own groups, right? So, but it's not something you can go to school and get a master's in compliance reporting or climate reporting.
Would that be
Right?
helpful if there was a school that did that?
You're taking me down a road that could get me in trouble.
Yeah.
Most universities are not set up to do this at all. When you look at most universities, they're busy with the green make-believe stuff. They're not even doing their climate reporting properly. And I'm talking about Harvard, MIT. I'm a U of I grad. You know what I'm saying? They're all out there. It's all make-believe, greenwashing and mirrors, because the students don't understand, don't get the fact that they're looking at, I can be a lead AP, or I can get my master's in environmental sustainability and get a job as a CSO, right? Chief Sustainability Officer. There is no way you're going to be Chief Sustainability Officer, right? Not without a good, solid understanding of the regulatory compliance that goes into it. So that's why I said those are our teeth out there that, hey, I'm done working in industry. I'm done doing this. I'm done doing that. I want to take a look at doing consulting. 10 years, you've got a background in already doing this stuff. You want to broaden that background. You want to see other industries. You want to really grow that skill set. That's when you show up on somebody like our doorstep.
So,
and if you look at the big 10 public audit firms, they're being sued by 37 states and the FTC for making believe with climate reporting. They don't have the expertise. They don't have the internal chops for any of this stuff. And yet they're guiding companies down a path that is leading them to be fined.
wow, it's not
So,
great.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's still quite a mixed bag out there.
At these companies that you guys work with, do you mainly work with the CSOs, or who's your main point person at these companies that you negotiate the contracts with and that you sign the deals with and that you interface with at the beginning? Obviously, through the day-to-day, you're not going to the CSO and say, hey, give me this reporting. You go to whoever gathers the reporting. But at the beginning, are those the guys you work with?
At the beginning, it's usually the CFO, right? Because our audits are done just like financial audits.
Right.
They're that in detail. The chief legal counsel, because they usually have an outside compliance legal group that they work with, and somebody from that group or one of the leads from that group is in our initial discussions. And then the CSO, and it depends on, it could be the EVP of sustainability or the EVP of EH&S. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the general breakout. And they're handing us the corporate reporting. They're handing us the sub-corporate reporting to look at, to come up with a pricing and a strategy. And they're much more engaged in how we want to approach that strategy, right? So they can buy off on it. So
Right.
that way, we carry $5 million in E&O insurance just to make sure, because some states require it, just in case we get sued. Very few firms out there claim they can do this, even have E&O insurance.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You're really
Right.
leaving yourself open for huge potential consequences without that E&O insurance.
Well, here in the greenwashing world, they're not working with legal. It's a very simple contract, and we're not responsible if you misreport. It's all based on the data that you gave us, and you're the one that screwed up, not us.
Right.
Right?
Hmm.
In the greenwashing world. So that's why I said you've got to look at where you're coming from versus us who are compliance, and you've got companies that are taking the greenwashing world and handing that out to investors. Yeah, right. It's like, well, you know. So I was on a call, and there was a senior principal from one of the big four audit firms on the call, and they were talking about, oh, corporate GHG, corporate GHG, corporate GHG, ISO's going away, ISO's going away. And I'm like, EPA said no corporate GHG, ISO only. You said ISO only. And that's because in kind of their whole practice is based on corporate GHG.
That's
I don't
crazy.
care what you want us to review it as, I'm going to give you the compliance view of it, right? That's where that's at. Through that consulting or attestation, and remember, attestation boils down to the three items, right? So attestation has three levels of approval, and you don't want to be, there's positive, qualified positive. You don't want to be below qualified positive, right? Because if you're below qualified positive, you failed. And the reporting body that you're reporting to is going to be showing up with, lawyers, guns, and money to make sure that they take yours really nicely, because they're going to audit all of your facilities, and they're going to do it, and you're going to pay for it, and it's not going to be fun,
Eesh.
right?
Yeah. No, that sounds
So,
like when
you
you're
know,
when you're getting into getting or finding a company that does this kind of reporting, you need to be very careful about who you choose, because it can really come back to bite you. Like you're talking about some of these other guys that just kind of, here's the report and kind of wash their hands of it. Like that's not my problem. It's your problem now if they come back and audit you. Sounds like you guys are a lot more thorough in your process and procedures and making sure you're above board with everything, especially like your E&O insurance. If something does come back on you guys for whatever reason, that's a different way of doing business than it sounds like the other guys do.
yeah, it is completely. So, we have quality assurance. We follow the ISO 9001 quality assurance internally when we deal with clients' data and clients and data security and all the rest of that stuff. They're not following any of that stuff. They're not
Yeah.
having somebody review, do a second party review and a third party review internally just to make sure that you're looking at what mistakes did we possibly miss or make,
Right.
right? Because we're all people taking a look at these giant spreadsheets, and some of these spreadsheets are 260 pages long.
Wow.
So, it's a lot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I can't imagine looking at a spreadsheet that's more than 2 or 3 pages long. I mean, I'll look at code all day long, which is just, lines and lines and lines of stuff. But man, looking at a huge
Sure.
spreadsheet like that, just
Well, and it's interconnected. Think about it. The total for this facility then appears on the total for that facility on this regional subtotal. So if you make a change in the facility, it should make the change throughout. Not always.
who set that spreadsheet up in the beginning? Who had to have the laborious task of like going through and adding all those formulas and all that nonsense?
We actually have a template that we run in-house. So, and it covers everything.
Is it the George template or no?
No, it's the company template. There was a bunch of us that worked on it to get it all the way in, right? Because it relates to renewables, right? And so we've got to be able to cover all these renewables. Is it hydro? Is it, biogas? Are you using biodiesel in your trucks? Are you using this? Or, are you burning biodiesel as a backup? Electric generation? What are you doing? Just all of this stuff comes into play. And it's one of those to where we would, right now, they require scope 1 and scope 2 reporting. 2027, they could require scope 3 reporting, which is your supply chain and other items that come into play. So it's more setting it all up for all of that. And as the regulation changes, we're in there making changes year over year, right? Because some states are on the same thing that the Fed is, or like Canada is for the provinces. Other provinces or states are different than the Fed. So those are state listed only. So it's not a one size fits all that you can easily zip it through.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah. So, and if we have clients that are interested, we will actually we'll post it we'll give them a web version that's not downloadable of our spreadsheet to use for just checking their own math if we're doing consulting,
Okay.
right? If we're doing attestation, you're sending us the spreadsheets,
Yep. And you're the
right?
one double checking
So,
them.
and we're going through and double checking all of that.
Yep.
That is correct.
So
So that's where that's at.
yeah, as technology's kind of, we've had a lot of improvement over the last, I'd say, 20, 25 years. I remember back in high school and middle school, my dad used to be an architect and he would build computers. And so that was, like kind of the
Mhm.
rudimentary days of the PC. And now we're far advanced from that. We're, light years beyond that. What major improvements have you seen in your industry that have allowed you guys to be more efficient? And what do you see coming down the pipeline in the next, say, 5 to 10 years that can exponentially increase your productivity and your revenue?
So for us, it's much more how fast the client is implementing a technology. So software is not allowed. Okay, done. I doubt that it will ever be allowed because they would like to put somebody in jail for fraud if it's done improperly. And if the attestation or the consultant makes mistakes, that's where you better have E&O insurance to be able to cover it up, to be able to pay those fines.
Right.
Right. So it's more the technology leaps forward. Continuous emissions monitoring, for example, SIMS, is a huge one. So for just picking out air reporting, right? So that actually works out really well. The other big piece is the BMS systems are advancing. Schneider's BMS stuff is advancing like crazy to where we can pull data from that, and it's reading the meter where I can pull the meter data on an hourly usage basis without having to go to the utility to get it. Right. So it's telling me how much it's coming across that each one of the electric meters at the facility or each meter at that particular line, electric meter at that particular line, how much it's coming across, even down to the sub meters. And it's giving me all those readings so that I can then compare those readings to the actuals that the guys are taking. Right. So we have a backup. So it's much more all of those are the advancements that are making it faster, quicker, easier on all of it. But that relies on the fact that you have calibrated these meters appropriately, which is once again the human factor,
Right.
right?
Yeah, the humans factor is definitely a factor in all things. We're
Yeah,
our own
well,
best friend and
you
our
know,
own worst enemy sometimes.
we are, and that's how that all comes to play. I mean, when we do renewable projects, and I'll just pick renewable energy certificates or credits as an example, because a lot of people are buying those and claiming renewable energy use, and they don't understand that the electric grid, I can track that from that particular farm to the utility distribution hub that feeds your facility. I can track those electrons, right?
Yeah, down to the location itself, like that one particular address or building or whatnot.
Down to where that power got delivered within the utility grid off a transformer into that distribution grid for that particular area. Call it
Hmm,
10 block area or 3 block area, depending on what you're looking at, right? From gate to substation.
okay.
Right? So I can actually track that. And a lot of people don't understand that if you can't track the electricity, then having the renewable energy certificate and claiming that you're using 100% renewables doesn't work.
Yeah. That seems like an obvious
Right.
fallacy there. It's like, oh yeah, I'm using 100% renewables. Why is your meter?
Well, I bought these. Yeah. I bought these certificates. Right. Great. I got a PPA, purchase power agreement. Right. And so I got a PPA. Okay, great. You got a PPA for your electricity, you're reducing your carbon footprint. The big understanding is that that particular set of wind turbines, because they're all done at the same time, they're all purchased, all the heads, the
Mhm.
generators are all done at the same time by the same manufacturer. So they all have a carbon footprint for that electricity being generated. It's very small. It might be 8 or 10 grams a kilowatt hour versus the grid, which here in Chicago is, 390 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And they're claiming zero, but they bought the RECs in Texas and there's no grid connection to Chicago.
Yeah. That's the whole
That's a
problematic.
problem, right?
Well, as
Or we'll get people that'll buy RECs. Oh, look at, I got a great deal on RECs, right? And the RECs aren't trackable back to the market where they're bought at, and they're not retired in the company's name or the facility's name, which is what they have to be. They're out of somebody's retired stock. So they just sold you their garbage.
basically, yeah, get taken to the
Yeah,
cleaners on that one.
right. Exactly.
Well, as we're coming up on the hour, do you have any other closing thoughts you want to share with us, George?
I'm more than glad to do this again. I think it's we just scratched the surface on all of it. As
Yeah.
you can tell, there's a lot to go through, but you know, uh, it's going to be an interesting time frame over the next couple of months into the next 2 to 3 years. Let's put it that way, as everybody gets sort of lined up in their reporting.
Sounds like it. We should probably circle back in a couple of months and do this again. That way I can hear kind of an update on how things are progressing. And I'm sure you guys are going to get an influx of additional clients, which is fantastic for you guys.
Yeah, and I would tell you that we do. So March 31st, all the reporting is due unless they extend it. So if we do something in March or April, if we do something in April, I can say, ooh, look at what the EPA is doing, and just give everybody sort of a little heads up, because we didn't even touch about what's a facility, how come, what's included, what's not included.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of misnomers still out there. It's a great way to get some education done.
Yes, sir. Well, George, I
I'm
really
more than willing to
appreciate.
chat again.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for sharing all your knowledge and your background in the industry. And I'm sure there's a lot more we could cover in the next podcast. So we'll definitely have to circle back around again.
Well, I appreciate the time, and thanks to all of your podcast listeners and watchers, and definitely interested in seeing where we go from here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.